Hello and welcome to another episode of the ADHD Goals Podcast. I've got a very exciting guest for you today. His name is Kyle Smith, and he is a clarity consultant and a developer of Neuro-Linguistic Somatic Experience, which could be abbreviated to NLSE, which I don't know if it's any easier to get out, but how are you doing today, Kyle?
I'm doing really well. It's my morning, because I imagine it's your afternoon or evening, and it's been a pretty good morning so far.
Good stuff. Yes, it is my afternoon, 3:00 here right now. But tell us, whereabouts are you right now?
I'm in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada.
Oh, wow.
I'm originally from the East Coast.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm imagining Canada to be full of big trees and lakes. Is that what it's like where you are?
Big trees, yes. More like a river than lakes.
Uh-huh.
I'm looking out my window. And the mountains are about 3-4 hours away, so you can get to pretty big mountains. And then, like, the province that I live in has a little bit of everything, minus the ocean, obviously.
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool here.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that you said the mountains are 3 or 4 hours away, like, that's something you might today, whereas because I think the perspective of living in a country the size of Canada, you think, oh yeah, well, that's far away, I'll go over there. Whereas in England, even though it's tiny in comparison to that, yeah, well, I'm not doing that anytime.
Yeah, when it takes like 8 hours to get somewhere, 3 hours seems easy.
Yeah, exactly. So the listeners will be interested, I'm sure, to understand what Neuro-Linguistic Somatic Experience is, NLSE. So how about you tell us, first of all, what that is, and then how you arrived at doing it?
Cool. So NLSE, Neuro-Linguistic Somatic Experience, is it's a practice. It's rather than a course. Well, it's a course. I would say it's a practice, and it's a outcomes-focused practice rather than a problems-focused practice. The problems get solved on the way to the focus or to the target. And the way I describe it in short is that it's the mindset gym for mental fitness. And from there, it's a top to bottom approach where it goes from the head, so the neuron, going into the mind, going into the mindset. Mm-hmm. And for mindset, because nowadays it's like a really cool, like it's a buzzword. It's like, I'm improving my mindset. I'm working on my mindset. Yeah. I'm making sure that my mindset is good before I go after my goals.
Yeah.
And folks have an ambiguous, unclear definition of what mindset is. And I think that the danger of this is that there's not an accurate reference point. So the way I define mindset is the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves or our opinion of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so it goes into the nervous system, which is where we get into the body, into the emotions. So top down. And we use words, stories, and breath as the focus part. And breath.
Well, that's what struck me when you got in touch and explained that to me. What resonated with me is during doing ADHD coaching, what I find is that there's a few things that we need to get in order to be able to move forward. We've hit the physiology of putting the right things into our body and exercise to make sure there's enough dopamine going into the brain to help with the executive functions. We also need to have a sort of a map and a guide, roadmap to where our goal is and how to get there and to break things down. But also, I think for someone like myself who was late diagnosed with ADHD, my mindset is full of all these negative labels or negative talk that I tell myself around all the past failures or challenges that I've had. And so I think that's one of the really important component in moving forward with ADHD, which I think quite often is the missing piece that people forget to address or to consider. They just rush straight into trying to create a new daily routine, but then they get overwhelmed and everything like that. So I would love to know more about how you go about doing that. But just before you do, can you maybe tell us a bit more about yourself and how you arrived at working with NLSE?
Totally. In short, I turned my problems into my passions.
Yeah.
I was a really solid pivot point was in 2016 when I made the decision that I wanted something different from my life. And so from there, I explored a couple different modalities to test what would work, what resonates and what doesn't resonate. And in that, the two things that really dialed me in the most were a combination of storywork and breathwork. And so putting those together, that's NLSE. And the main things that I was struggling with was a lack of respect for myself, compassion. I didn't practice patience. I practiced impatience. I did it was not positively impacting my relationship with myself. And then as a result, it negatively impacted my relationships with others outside of me and the rest of the world around me. And there's a point where it's simply a clean slate. And I do not want to repeat past behaviors because the context and the circumstances you can't control. However, I wanted to control and be in charge of and directing how I respond. I wanted to be the autonomous action taker rather than a dependent dweller.
So you've mentioned respect for yourself and compassion for yourself and patience. What was the result of those challenges? What were you finding how did that represent itself in sort of daily life?
It would be a combination of habitual drinking and infidelity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't want to go with that route anymore.
Yeah. No. It's amazing to be able to discover when we're facing our challenges is to then have the time and patience to look inside ourselves to figure out what it is. I mean, I remember myself, like there was a period, I'd say up until my 30s, or it was after when I separated, I divorced and separated from my ex-wife. That was the first sort of time that I had sort of had a big time to reflect on myself. And it was the first time that I questioned, how did I get this wrong? I think, I've got 2 kids. And so that was the first step. Like there was everything up until the point before I had kids, it was like, I'm the center of my universe and everything. I'm right about everything, this, that, and the other. I can never be wrong. That was somebody else's fault or whatever. And then having kids and giving me that first bit of separation of like, oh, there's somebody else that's more important in the world. And then I suppose the danger of having lost that family unit, and I need to really consider what went wrong here. And then that created a whole lot of introspection. I need to consider a lot of things, and through all that work that comes with I'd never understood when people said, oh yeah, I had to really work on myself. I was like, what does that mean? And then I found out.
Fair. Yeah. Yeah. I do think that it's either by choice or by chance. Like it's either going to be choice or chance that things will happen. So like yourself, that it happened for myself at least, I'm not going to speak on your behalf. For myself, it was things got to the point where it was not, it was by chance that it got shoddy. And that was my reflection point. And then after that point, it was by choice, the choice to do something different. Yeah. Chance or choice, man. It can bust us up or it could create something amazing.
Yeah. So you, as a clarity consultant, can you tell us a bit about what that means and who might come to you and what might they work with you on?
Or it's for folks that feel stuck. They're unclear on where they want to go. They are thinking about other people's thinking more often than they're thinking about their own thinking. So they're putting their expectations, they're taking the expectations of others, adopting them, and trying to live up to all those. So we're not living up to our own expectations, and that could create resentment to the people who have the power over us. And so the main point is the first phase of it is where folks are getting unstuck. It's going into negative narrative stories that hurt, haunt, taunt, annoy, stories like traumas or like heavy duty stories. Then from there we go into, because there's a point where that alleviates, and then we go into celebrating our progress, celebrating our wins, celebrating it with others as well. And then from that point, because the head's cleared up, then it's targets and goal setting, because people are more action prone and they're inspired and more intentional towards where they're going. So the folks that'll come to me are, if they find themselves on a block, if they find themselves with chronic negative narratives, if they find themselves people pleasing, if they are indecisive, if they are great at taking action, but low on making priorities.
Yeah, tick.
So close. Yeah.
So, I mean, I was wanting to go back to what you said at the beginning of that, but you actually sort of summarized it at the end there. So, I mean, I'm picking out all the bits that I think are very common with ADHD, and you sort of said it, like people pleasing. I think it's a lot easier, and this is quite a common thing with ADHD, is rather than taking priority of our own needs, it's much easier to complete things or get things done when it's for somebody else. When it comes to doing things that move us forward, we become indecisive, and that was another word that you used. Yeah, I think people pleasing, indecisiveness, and not being able to prioritize in order to make space for all of those things is a big challenge for people with ADHD.
Certainly can be. That's for sure.
Yeah. So how might that work then? What would you start working on in order to move forward on those?
For those ones, one thing that I would ask, if it was someone specifically with ADHD, which seems appropriate for this podcast,
Yeah.
it would be understanding what the intention is behind why they're there to begin with. Because he was a neuropsychologist, I forget his name, and I very much agree with him on this part, because I do have a different frame of what ADHD could be, rather than like how it could be an evolution more so than it is a hindrance. And I think, because he said something earlier that really where it's a neurodivergent person in trying to fit into the box. And I would actually make it more specific. I would say it's a neurodivergent person pretending to be a convergent thinking person.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a difference between the two. And I think that because we have so much stuff where you can see the increase where our external environment became easier. So our internal environment is all consensual survival now in most developed countries. And so we have all these options. So I don't think we have an issue with attention. It's intention. So rather than attention deficit disorder, it's intention deficit disorder. And some folks, I've had someone ask me, well, I can't focus on anything like forever. Like I just could never ever do it. It's like, oh yeah. Have you ever like subscribed to Netflix? Yeah. Have you watched any good shows? Oh yeah. I was watching Peaky Blinders. That's my personal favorite.
Yeah.
I was watching Peaky Blinders the other day. Oh, sweet. Have you ever I don't know, watched like a couple episodes in a row? Oh yeah, I've binged hard. How many episodes? Oh, like 4. You've done 4 episodes in a day? Yeah. That's 4 hours of focus. That's 4 hours of attention. So it's not an attention issue, it's an intention issue. Why is it that we're doing the things that we're doing? Because I also think that a cool side effect of the Industrial Revolution is that because things have become simpler, like it's easier for us to get groceries, we have heating, we have all of our main things taken care of. It provided us time to think more, which wasn't the case for a majority of actually pretty much all of our human history. And so now it's not a matter of attention, it's thinking of what are the important things that I really want to do, that I want to do, not what does my mom want me to do? What does my dad want me to do? What does my significant other want me to do? So when we have the intention behind the behavior, then it's easier to stay focused.
Mm-hmm.
And
I really like that phrase. It's not attention, it's intention. What is your intention? But you also, I mean, the fact that you brought up the Industrial Revolution, that for me personally, when we talk about ADHD, and I'm using air quotes here, neurotypical, and what I said earlier, I don't know whether we were talking before we pressed record, but it was about fitting in that box. For me, that box comes from the industrial, what has happened since the industry.
Oh, interesting. Why do you think that?
I think, before, I mean, I'm thinking in Britain and the Industrial Revolution there, people would have, cities really developed after the Industrial Revolution in terms of people moving into the cities and rather than working sort of in the countryside, they would then move to cities where the factories were in order to get jobs there. And then soon after the factories we had this economy of factories, etc. That's when schools became for everybody, because the school education system was there to streamline everybody into, are you going to be a manager or are you going to be a worker, or do you need to go and find something else to do? And so the education system quickly sort of replicated the rest of your life was going to be in terms of working between the bell, however long the class was, so be like a shift bell and everything like that. And all the opportunities came from how well can you fit into the streams that we're providing for you. And so that box, that analogy of fitting into the box, it's like, well, I don't actually fit into the box because I need the typical restless version of ADHD that we most commonly talk about. Even if you're a badly behaved boy that couldn't sit still, then you would get told off, and then you wouldn't learn anything because you weren't given the opportunity to learn anything, and therefore you'd be stuck because you wouldn't perform well at school. And so you're on the outside of the system. So I think when we talk about being neurotypical, we've only created that normal typical thing because of the society that we've built around us. I think
I like that.
I think people with ADHD and neurotypical people, they got on well as they were when they were working outside. They just had different ways of expressing, getting things out. They probably would have done jobs that required a lot of physical activity or being outside or whatever. And it probably wasn't apparent that they were any different to anybody else because, or less apparent or less of a challenge. It was less apparent through being a challenge. So, and I did have a guest on before who actually told me about the first time an ADHD-like symptoms was diagnosed by a doctor, and it was not too long after the Industrial Revolution. It wasn't called ADHD, but the first sort of times it was talked about as being something.
I do agree with that. And the way that I frame it is because I think that before the Industrial Revolution, I agree with you, where there wouldn't be a singular litmus test in order to see how minds vary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like how you said, because it was the Industrial Revolution, and then I totally agree where it was the structuring. That's the part where we started really, because I think of it where there's neuroconvergent and there's neurodivergent, and the convergent is neurotypical, or I just think of it as the two polarities.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's neurodivergent, then the opposite would be neuroconvergent, and the two would be an example of neuroconvergent is that there's one problem, one solution, one way to get there.
Mm-hmm.
School system.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's neurodivergent, where there's one problem and multiple ways to get there. And so the way that I actually view neurodivergence and neuroconvergence is the difference between hunters and gatherers. So we got the hunters, then we got the gatherers. Some people can be more wired towards problem solving, because I say that I did not do very well in school. I crush it at life though. So it's interesting. It's interesting having that. And I think that the resentment or the discouragement comes when someone is trying to be normal.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's bollocks.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the challenge. And that's where I think where a lot of those negative labels, where the neurotypical adulting is presented as the way forward, and someone who is with ADHD can often find themselves in a situation where they focus more on trying to do the things that they're not necessarily best at, rather than doing the things that they're really good at, because they think to be seen as a successful adult, I've got to be able to do all these things, and that can lead to unhappiness and being stuck, because you're never doing anything that you excel at. You're just constantly
Totally.
in a rut.
And then that's why I think that part is be seen as rather than stepping into it, because that's still a projection. That's not a reflection. So that's still, I'm trying to impress the world around me rather than me trying to impress myself. So why is it that I would want to be seen if I don't see myself? Because then what do I got to contribute at that point?
Yeah. One of the biggest challenges that I have is, I do this with my clients, like a saboteur's assessment, and you can do that on Positive Intelligence, the website there. And basically you answer a bunch of questions and it gives you like these different profiles of what your top saboteurs are. And mine is high achiever. Now that sounds, you say, oh, that sounds great, I'm a high achiever, but it's not. It's not necessarily a good thing. It means that it's almost like understanding what perfection is. I thought a perfectionist was somebody who did something perfectly all the time and was like a real stickler for that. So I would never have called myself a perfectionist, but I've found that I always want to achieve things really well because of the external, I'm still reading. For people that are listening or not watching, my camera's done that thing again where it zooms in and it looks like I'm really trying to make a point.
I was actually thinking of like, damn, this guy's going heavy. And I just imagine the background. It was like, oh, are we talking?
I'll put the music in afterwards.
Seeing
It has made me forget what it is.
positive. It was the book with positive part.
Yeah. So the hyperachieving is if because of the external validation, wanting to be seen by everybody else as doing the things that that everybody else can do, or the things that I struggle with, means that, but I can't always do that, and it's really hard for me. So at somewhere along the line, I'm going to say, well, this isn't going to be good enough, so I'll stop and I'll do something else that's safe, and that is a big challenge, I guess, for a lot of people that perhaps come into your path.
Yeah. With because I would consider myself a higher achiever. I would fall under very similar categories yourself if I was reflecting on it, or if I'm reflecting on it. Something that, because it's still a narrative, so it's still a story that we're telling ourselves about ourselves. And when it comes to the reason for self-sabotage, what is the resistance to that? And I think that if the resistance is towards, the resistance inspires the self-sabotage, and the resistance is due to I'm just coming up with stuff as well. I'm just coming up with stuff. At that point, it's not an issue of self-sabotage. It's not an issue of what it is, an issue of expectation. And so I would get the expectation dialed in, or I have gotten the expectation dialed in. So for example, instead of doing great things in a short period of time, I want to do great things over a 10-year period of time. And so in my mind, it tricks my brain at least to think, 10 years, that's totally doable. So there's more resistance taken away. And then there's not the pressure of achieving things quickly. Because I think that a high achiever, it's not just one thing, one moment, or how quickly someone accomplishes something. It's what you accomplish in a lifetime.
Yeah.
So you can be a high achiever over a whole lifetime. And I think anyone can create some pretty crazy cool stuff.
Well, I think what you said earlier, you mentioned quite early on about celebrating successes. I think that you said that, and if you look at that from what you were saying, if the expectations are for somebody who is a perfectionist or everything has to be high achiever, everything has to be brilliant. If that expectation is so high or so far away, you're on a daily basis, you're not really ever going to get close to it because it's so far away. And so you forget to celebrate the fact, what did you achieve today? Or what did you achieve this month? And in the past, when I left my last, my boss said, "Oh, what was the favorite project?" That was 10 years I worked there. And it said, "What was your favorite project?" And I said, "I don't have one," because it was always felt like it was so hard to achieve what I wanted to achieve with it that, it was never, none of them ever felt like I, succeeded. And, that in the end builds up to what story we tell ourselves, what negative labels we have.
Totally. Yeah, I think celebrating the wins is super huge because for me, when I wasn't celebrating progress and wins, then all I was focusing on was the gap between where I am now and where I want to be. And then that ignoring the gain didn't help much. And I think that it's because the time that I heard it on this book, the theme was about dopamine. Forget what the title was. I always want to say miracle molecule. However, that's DMT. That's not dopamine. And one point that the book had that I really like, and that there's information to back it up, it was from studies and stuff, is that we don't release dopamine when we get the thing that we wanted. It's actually in the pursuit of that we release the dopamine.
Yeah.
So that's why, for example, Christmas, you get something, you like it for the day, and then you're done with it for the day. It's because that thing that you were excited, like December 1st, you were like, I want to have this gift for Christmas. And then for that whole month, you're like pumped. And then you get the gift and you're like, okay, this is cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it goes back. So it's in the anticipation and the pursuit that we really get that dopamine.
I've read that as well. And the dopamine is there beforehand in order to make you move, in order to get there and process whatever the thing is. But yeah, I mean, talk all day about dopamine and ADHD. And so I wonder, because you've mentioned a lot about the breath work and what role that plays in, I mean, for me, I use breath work as well. And it's essentially explain that to switch from, I use the analogy of the chimp brain and the human brain. So human brain's got all the functions that requires all the dopamine to power it. But the chimp brain is there just doing fight, flight, or freeze or whatever. But we find ourselves
fornicate.
Yeah.
Or fornicate.
Yeah.
A couple F's there.
I'll have to add that one in next time. And so if we ever find ourselves procrastinating or whatever the F it was, creative sectors.
Oh, that was awesome. All right. As someone that pays attention to words, that was just a beautiful flow. Oh, man. Cool. I like that.
Yeah, we use the breath work to be able to switch system to say, okay, I'm engaged now. I've noticed that I'm in the chimp brain and now I need to transition. So what breath work do you do? And how does it fit into your practice?
The way that breathwork fits in, well, it involves the body.
Yeah.
And so how storywork focuses on the mind, I don't put much thought into how the body, or I don't explain the conscious mind. I don't explain the animal or the chimp brain as well. The way that I put it is that it's an overall down regulation or up regulation. Because the way that I think of breathwork is that breathwork is an umbrella term for all these different modalities, all these different tools. So you can have an up-regulating breath style, like breath of fire, or you can have a down-regulating breath style, where it could be something like parasympathetic breathing, box breathing, and you can have something in the middle. to downregulate, upregulate. And so the way that works is person comes in to have a session, or we have it on Zoom, and we start with a good vibe check or a vibe check overall, just to see where they're at, how their day was, anything from the last session or anything from whatever. And then that way I can get an idea of, oh, this person's in a little bit more of a down-regulated state. Oh, this person's in a little bit more of an up-regulated state. And I want to purposefully aim them to be, if it's a scale of 1 to 10, 4, 5, 6. So somewhere in there. And the reason for that is so that when we go into the stories, they're calm, they're more intentional, they're more, because I say like have an intention behind the breath. Like, what is it that you want to get out of today's session? So they're thinking of that as they're going through the breath, and I have music and stuff too. So I have a pretty cool vibe with it. It's fun.
Yeah.
There's like drums. It's fun. And so I'll do that, get them regulated. And then we go into the stories where they're in a cool, calm, collected state. So we have the opportunity to go into heavy stories, which I'm totally cool with. I prefer doing it early on. And so then people are able to declutter the mind in order to make room to throw the party. They get their breath in it, and then they get their stories in check, and everything's just a lot more neutral and less indecision and indirection.
Mm-hmm. So if you could define for me, when you say you work on stories, can you delve into a little bit about what that actually means, or give me some examples of what stories people bring into a session?
Totally. Examples of stories. So I'll define story, and a story is simply an experience, a dream, a anxiety. It could be a moment in time. It could be anything that can be written down can be done as a story.
Yep.
And for each of those phases I mentioned earlier, if someone's getting unstuck, let's say they had a parent that passed away, a child that passed away, divorce, they had an experience when they were 9 years old and they want to dive into that. It could be different themes as well, because stories are simply just information. It's just data. And so the way that I am working with someone is I have a data-oriented mind while having a little bit of like we're putting the work in. And so I like to see where the themes are. So let's say if a theme is rejection, if a theme is fear, if a theme is self-sabotage. So then it makes it easier to see which stories or where to go, because there is common denominators among all people. And being able to find those common denominators is where I've been able to pull the most, not me, where my participants have been able to explore their stories in a set and setting where they're feeling a good vibe.
Yeah.
A story is anything that can be written down more or less.
Yeah.
It could be hypothetical, it could be real. I've Trojan horsed a couple stories, so it has a different story, same meaning. And that way it's a way to go. So for example, I'm not going to say names just because it's privacy stuff. I was working with this one lady, and she had a couple stories over a long duration of time that in her mind were all one big story rather than multiple separate stories.
Uh-huh.
And there were some things that she was comfortable with going in, some things she wasn't. And so what we did, because she liked to write anyways, and she's very imaginative, very creative, I asked her if she was open to, because I will not explore a story that someone's not open to. I'm not going to force anyone to do the work if they don't want to do the work. That's a waste. And so for that one, she put it into a fairy tale context, similar meaning, different context. Because when we go into the stories, it's our meaning, and this is what I've been exploring with and seeing, it's the meaning associated to the story. It's not the story itself. And so if we can carry the meaning over it, Trojan horse back around that emotional block, that emotional story, and it just like alleviates a little bit, just enough for people to be able to, oh, I didn't see it that way before, or, oh, that's interesting, or, So a pattern introduction is what we're aiming for.
And I think as the way you've described that there, it's making me think of, just how important and intrinsic storytelling is to us as a human race. I mean, if anything, that's the most important thing. That's what separates us from animals, is the stories that we tell ourselves. And what I found personally and with the clients that I have is that with ADHD, you can get lost in all the different possibilities that, and you can catastrophize a situation if you get emotionally, if you have an emotional reaction to something, and then you catastrophize about something, and you're trying to make sense of it. Being able to listen to that and then sort of maybe reflect that back as a more of a pithy caption or bring it into a metaphor or something like that, then they can go, oh, okay, that makes sense. Because when I'm in the fog, I can't see the outcome and I can't understand what's happening. But now I've put it into a story, I can say, this is how I feel about that story, and that's how I'm going to move forward. And yeah, I think it's incredible. I mean, and also you said, I'd not heard about the up work, breath work and the down breath work. And it makes perfect sense to find somewhere in the middle to work on it, because if you're, how I would put it, like in the chimp mode, you're going to just catastrophize more. You're not going to use any logic to figure stuff out. And so being in the right frame of mind for a session, it makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Also, cute pup.
Puppy back there?
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
adorable.
Well, I've just been listening to him bark for the last 5 minutes. I don't know if it picked, but I can only imagine that I've had some Christmas presents delivered and he's been trying to rip them out of the box. But yeah, so just, I think we're starting to run out of time a little bit. So how can people get in touch with you? Where can we find you?
I have a website, www.clarityconsultant.ca, because I'm Canadian.
Yeah.
And then my social medias, all the handles are Dapper Dude Kyle, DAPPER DUDEKYLE. And if you want to have a conversation, Instagram is my fastest response time.
Yeah. Well, I will put a link in the show notes for all those. So we're recording this now in the last few weeks before Christmas, but this will probably go out in the new year. What does 2025, that is the year that we're going into, isn't it?
Yes.
What does that look like for you? What's on the cards?
It's going to be an explosion of this practice, more or less. Because the year before did a podcast, this year paused the podcast, focused on the practice. And then following year is going to be audience, awareness, and changing lives. It's pretty cool. Got some cool things coming.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Carl, for taking the time to chat with me today. It's been a fascinating conversation. And I wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Likewise, dude. Thank you.
Well, there we have it. Thank you so much for listening this far. If you want to hear more episodes, then please subscribe on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you use. It really helps to spread the word. So if you know anyone this episode could help, then please share it with your friends. If you want to follow me on social media, I am on Instagram at ADHD_goals, and you can find me on Facebook too. If you want to get in touch with the show, then you can email me at hello@adhdgoals.co. And finally, if you're struggling to manage your ADHD and you would like me to be your coach, then please head over to my website and get in touch. Until next time, bye for now.